podcast because the VILT maximizes the learning environment and tries to create or replicate the one-on-one or one-on, 20, 30 or whatever the case may be, experience of the classroom situation. So whereas we will have a Q&A session later, VILT would have the opportunity for me to reach out, have you guys break out into groups or have activities that I've prepared for you or anything like that and be able to provide feedback on those activities. So that's what sort of differentiates VILT under our definition today. Interestingly enough, from ATD, it's 11% of hours used in 2018. Now, what do we mean by e-learning? In this operationalized definition, we're calling e-learning as any sort of one-on-one. So this is typically a course in, for example, Articulate Rise or maybe Articulate Storyline or any sort of self-guided course that is delivered electronically. Again, ATD has a ongoing definition, as many of you may well know. But the first part of it reads, a structured course or learning experience delivered electronically. So I really like that definition, but again, it would technically incorporate the ILT. So for our purpose, try to consider it as the one-on-one. It accounted for nearly 40% of formal learning hours in 2017, and again, that is ATD. And I found a great figure from ATD saying that more than 1 billion learners abruptly became e-learners in the last quarter, mostly because of COVID-19. I have 3 kids myself, and watching my son, who is in, first grade, pivot from a classroom experience to an all online experience in the matter of one day, it was a pretty fascinating thing to see. And I'm sure that many of our colleagues in many organizations are experiencing a similar situation. It accounted for nearly 40% of formal learning in 2017. And, I apologize. And I think that the way of delivery is also very interesting to consider as well. In my role as Director of Sales and Marketing, I do field a lot of questions as to how will our learners take in the training. That is, will they be working on a personal laptop, a company laptop, an iPad, or some other physical piece of technology? So I found it interesting that 8 out of 10 completed their training via laptop, 7 out of 10 via desktop, and 4 out of 10 used a smartphone. Now, on one side of me, I thought that the smartphone would be a lot higher, but there are a lot of local regulations and other sort of company privacy rules that would stop individuals from using their personal smart device. I think that that is worth considering, especially as we are converting and when we're looking for easy, fast solutions, to remember not only will what are the best learning objectives that you're trying to do in 2020, as well as what is the best delivery modality. Yes, Paul, definitely. So some learners, for example, maybe for the smartphone learners, also access via a desktop and also accessed via a laptop. So it's not exclusive. So perhaps somebody went through the training and started on a laptop and then worked on a desktop and then maybe did part of it on a smartphone as well. All right. So Jenny, that is a great question, and we will be going through stuff in just a moment on that as well. So I wanted to bring my colleague Synthia Clark on board with this because we recently, in partnership with TTA, developed an ILT training, and well, a lot of stuff happened on it. So we're calling it from the airport. So Synthia, Marlene gave you a really quick introduction. Was there anything else that maybe you wanted to add or what your role was on this project?
Sure. So my role in this project, I started off as project lead and lead ID. And I did a little less ID in the front end. And as it's gone forward, I've done more and more instructional design.
Thank you, Synthia. Could you just initially set forward the vision of the initial project, sort of when we started work, when we did our design document, everything like that? What did we envision this training as delivering?
Yeah, Ted. We were creating a 3.5 instructor-led training for a top 5 consulting agency. And our workshop was going to become part of an in-person 2-day training event for employees who were a few months into their new roles. And these entry-level employees were, as Ted likes to call them, wonder kids. So they were extremely intelligent, high-performing individuals coming straight from MBA programs or prestigious undergraduate degrees. And part of our goal initially, and still today, was to ensure retention. So the company has a feedback-driven culture. They believe in continuous improvement, and they embrace change, which is like all wonderful stuff. However, most of our learners have never experienced this much feedback, and certainly not so many opportunities to improve. So on top of their intense workload, they were really feeling bombarded by all the feedback that they've just never had to deal with before. So in order to prevent these employees from feeling alone or getting burned out, we focused our workshop on requesting and receiving feedback with resilience. And we have a number of real scenarios for learners to consider. We have practical takeaways and advice from people who have actually been in their shoes. We also had a lot of opportunities to share, work in small groups, and physically move around.
Thank you very much. Why did you choose to emphasize ILT specifically when we have other modalities available at our fingertips?
Sure. So this training, like I mentioned, it was a 3.5-hour workshop, but it was part of a 2-day in-person event already. So that was part of it, but some underlying factors. I mean, people just like being around other people. I think a lot of us know that. ATD and TTA have both had surveys that show more than half of the survey respondents saying they prefer in-person training. And there's great use for that. And it also makes it pretty easy to switch from instructor-led to virtual instructor-led. If that is part of your culture and that's what you're used to, that's kind of a natural step.
We have a couple of really quick questions. How long was the training, and what role did our portion of the training play?
So our workshop was 3.5 hours long. And it was part of that 2-day training event where they were taking a lot of other courses, things like learning Excel for their jobs, just general onboarding, things of that nature.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And one last question that we'll do, and then we're going to move on to the next bullet. How many participants were in the training approximately? Or how many were you designing for?
So we were designing for groups of 10 to 14, I believe, was the initial run. But these are small groups that would take the workshop at one moment, but it's actually part of a 5-year program and many conferences, global sort of thing. So it was a huge program, but for a small class size, if that makes sense.
Totally does. Thank you. We're here talking about this because stuff didn't go according to plan. Can you help us look at what derailed the initial vision that you just laid out of the project?
Certainly. Okay. So it's the second week of March, and we're about to do a second round of on-site beta testing. I am at the airport gate. My laptop is put away. I've got one of those tags on my carry-on bag because I'm boarding in 15 minutes. And then I get a text asking when my flight is because some things might be changing. And my initial thought is, oh man, we're going to have to meet and change like last minute for this pilot. So I need to share my meeting schedule so they know when I'm available. And that's what I did. But very quickly, I realized that the actual problem was that we might not be allowed on site due to COVID-19. And like cue the uncertainty, stress, and mild panic. So my plane at this point has started boarding, and I've been told we might not be allowed on site for testing. So I'm texting with TTA, I'm Teamsing, yes, Teamsing, our account manager who happened to be Ted, and I'm dragging out my laptop to find our company handbook with the travel agency contact information. Mind you, it's on my phone and an email address, but like that would have been way too rational, you know, because I'm freaking out. I mean, this is a business decision with implications beyond my person, and we don't know anything for certain. So eventually, after a really hectic 15 minutes of not knowing what to do, the decision was made for me not to board the plane. And ultimately, I was pretty lucky because my poor TTA colleagues had already landed and had to hop right back on a plane to fly home. So ultimately, the pandemic drastically derailed the initial vision of our workshop. We had to reassess, and a virtual pilot with stakeholders and facilitators was scheduled about a week and a half after the on-site testing got canceled.
So how long did you have from the point that you heard about the fact that you were no longer going to be boarding the plane to having to develop the VILT training?
So the initial run was for that pilot meeting, which was about a week and a half later. So less than 2 weeks was the first run. That was definitely not our final, nor will it be. We're still iterating to this day, but that's how things work. But our first pass at it was less than 2 weeks.
So as we sort of look at it, and if you can sort of emphasize any of the potential lessons learned in the process of developing, as well as any sort of anecdotal stories you may have about how you got there, would be wonderful.
Yeah, so I think the biggest lessons were just to simplify and refocus. Because initially when we started, this project had a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and it led to some great content. But over time, we were able to really streamline our resources and also really understand what worked best and which lessons and interactions needed to be prioritized. So the things that we couldn't let go, that were really hitting hard and were getting the main points across. And this was vital because our 3.5-hour instructor-led training is now a 2-hour virtual instructor-led training. So things had to be cut, and we had to be really focused about what the main points were and what we were trying to do. And thinking about the lessons, I was pretty lucky because I had been part of the project. So I really did have the source content down pretty well. But I had to very quickly get up to speed on the platform we were using, not only to translate activities, so the purpose remained fulfilled, but also to prep facilitators for this totally different modality. And we actually ended up adding a producer role and incorporating the producer tasks in the facilitator guide. That way they could be prepared. We had this new role, but they knew where they fit in. And then we also included a number of tutorials and best practices to make sure everyone was starting from the same page, because this project had many different facilitators.
Could you possibly expand a little bit on what producer entailed, and why that was important?
Yeah, so we were switching to a platform that our primary facilitator hadn't used in a while. Also, we had predominantly live facilitators. So if you have that mentality, it's a bit of a culture shock switching to the virtual instructor led. It's quite different, very valuable, very different. So we thought, and actually the client suggested this, and it was a great idea. They wanted to make sure they had someone from their company in the meeting to help make sure things ran smoothly. So that meant they are fielding chat questions, they are handling the polls, and they are also doing things like annotating participant responses as the learning goes on.
So as you talk about a producer, it brings to mind our current situation. And Marlene, a couple of chats ago, did request everybody to please use the Q&A feature of Zoom. So if you look on your screen, you should have a Q&A as opposed to the chat. We will get it to a point at the end when we have an opportunity for a lot of questions, but there are a couple good points that have come up that I would like to hit real quick if we could. The first one was how many people were on your delivery design, or how many people were on your delivery team, your design team, and your facilitators?
So I was a little bit removed from the facilitators. I was in contact primarily with the lead facilitator, and TTA was doing a T3 situation where they had a lead facilitator who would teach all the other facilitators basically. So I got to meet some on the virtual pilot, but I don't know how many facilitators there are.
Excellent. So TTA helped set up the facilitators for that.
They didn't just help, they ran it.
Okay, cool.
They did it all. For my design team, initially we had kind of 4 instructional designers and writers, and it was a little intense, which is why as we moved along, we really streamlined and narrowed things down to the point where The second big iteration for the instructor-led training, it was myself and another ID doing the bulk of the work. And then for the VILT, that person actually dropped off and I was the primary for VILT. And part of that was just due to time. In some situations, the less time you have, the better it is to have a smaller amount of people working on things, because otherwise it just gets really messy and complicated.
Absolutely. And then the last question that I'll field from the chat as well, and then I promise everyone will stop watching the chat and we'll keep on keeping on. But it says, while the various platforms have interactive capabilities, did you have any experiential activities that you had built in that needed to be transformed? And it says, please provide details, but maybe we could talk through a single activity to sort of help flesh out how you did that.
Yeah, so we had a ton of activities. And the thing about that, this is a little bit more high level than what the question asked for, but it's so important to take an activity and think about the true purpose of that activity. So why did we have this activity in the first place? What was the point of it? Because you're not trying to translate it one-to-one, and if you do, it may fail. And we had that happen. So for instance, one of our first things we did, we broke everyone into 2 groups. So it's probably 7 and 7. And we had them write on flip charts in the instructor-led training questions about feedback. And we tried to translate this in WebEx, and it flopped. It failed so hard, but we thought that might be the case. There was an instructor note that this may fail, and here's what we'll do next time. So we weren't sure it would work out, kind of thought it might not, but we wanted to try it because if it had worked out, it would have been really cool because we were trying to use whiteboards and really recreate that experience. And it just didn't. And so we got back to the point of what we were trying to get across in that question, and we made it to where it's more user-friendly. And we translated the activity, making sure that the purpose was translated, not the actual activity itself, if that makes sense.
I like that. Thinking back to the sort of learning objective and trying to reiterate that in the platform. So
Exactly.
it sounds like there was already a lot of thought that was put into the ILT training, ILT. And you had to turn it around and pretty carefully move stuff. How was that change received by the client?
Yeah, ultimately, it's been well received. The workshop was put into practice a couple of weeks ago, and we're still iterating as we gain more insights to the learner's needs. So, literally just last week, we realized that this situation probably isn't changing as quickly as perhaps thought. So we included slides on how to request and receive feedback in a remote environment, because that's their reality now. So that probably won't stay in the instructor-led training. But it was a need that we wanted to address for what they're dealing with in the moment. And ultimately, it has been an adventure, but a great opportunity for growth. It's always fun to learn more and try new things and understand how things work.
Excellent. Was there anything you can say from working with the end client principals that was good to sort of learn how to communicate these changes and explain moving from that ILT culture to the VILT solution?
I think it was more of a give and take. So understanding the desires of the client and also making it work in a way that will be beneficial to the learner. And I think that's part of every project that goes back to it. And just really explaining things. So if a client isn't as familiar with certain platforms, you want to give them the reason why you're doing things a certain way. Because they may say, oh, there's this really cool tool. But just because there's a really cool tool, it doesn't mean you have to use it. You got to think about what's best and what is going to flow and work better for your learners. So just keep your learners in your heart, in your minds, keep them in mind.
Excellent. And we have some other great questions in the chat, but I'm going to save them because we are at 23 after for the Q&A portion of it. Some of it talks about specific activities that we translated, so maybe we'll get a chance to sort of talk about the actual conversion in a minute. But first, I wanted to talk about the benefits of ILT, and I believe we have a poll. I would love if everybody could answer the poll of what are your feelings toward VILT? All right, and I think we're going to be wrapping this up here pretty quick. And if it if if this depends, just go big feeling, right? You're in the shopping mall or shopping the grocery store and you see Cheerios or Honey Nut Cheerios. Just take your pick, whatever the case may be. All right, great. If we could wrap up that poll, and I believe that the responses will post on the screen as well. This is my first rodeo. All right, there we go. So it looks like we have about 260 people, or 68%, that say they have no reservations, and we do have 124, or 32%, say that they do, with the underlying thought that it depends, like much in the world. So that is great to know. Thank you very, very much. Some of the benefits, and oh, this is great. So Jonathan Rock says, just another tool in the chest. And I love that idea, because I think that the wider variety of tools that we have, the more that we can sort of move the needle of the learner's needs. But some of the basic thoughts of that I have personally when I'm selling and I'm thinking and I'm speaking with clients about the benefits of VILT. The first one of makes investment comparison readily trackable. Now, what do I mean by that? There is an initial thought in this current environment that when you're looking at how much you would spend on a conference, right, or per diem or airfare, food, everything like that, that you can actively look at saying, we aren't going to be spending this money on this delivery anymore. So how much can we spend on converting our VILT? So then that way, at least the learners are continuing to get the training. It is readily adaptable, meaning that when you have items that do change in the future, you can change things to the learning environment, even as you're delivering. So if an activity is not working for a particular group, a good facilitator should be able to pivot and be able to figure out a way to make it work for that specifically group. Now, one of the sort of external ones that I've noticed is it teaches staff to work remotely. And then I have another one in here that provides opportunity to review material and redefine learning goals, as well as organization to review information management policies, procedures, and real life usability. So to me, all three of those are kind of in the same stress test. Basically, if you have a great activity to do, but you change it to, for example, a fillable PDF, and you put it on your SharePoint or you put it on your shared drive, and somebody is trying to follow along and learn, and maybe that item is no longer useful in the digital environment, that's a good opportunity to look at the learning goals, right? Or even worse, if that employee cannot access the material because their home router puts up a reason that you cannot join the SharePoint or whatever the case is, it's a really great opportunity for people to learn how to work in new ways. A lot of different people have joined the virtual world of working here in the last little bit, and there will be a return to normalcy, but also it's a great stress test for all of us to figure out what works and what doesn't in this world. I found that lock on my door works really great for my kids on occasion. Finally, one of the great things is if you do record your VILT training, it does give you an opportunity to generate raw resources, audio, video, or whatever the case may be, that you can then turn around and provide micro-learning samples, or potentially work it into a bigger e-learning module. I agree, Roman. We're probably not going back to the old way completely ever, but you know, what's that phrase? The new now, not even the new normal. So it's a great way. I think that we're at an amazing opportunity to pivot and look at how we can be most effective in the world, whatever it means, whether it's exactly the same as it was or a little bit different. Also, one of the other great things, and I love this, I didn't even think about this, and then Cynthia brought it up to me when we were working through the slides, is that it helps address potential accessibility gaps. And that is accessibility in the sense of both, I typically wear glasses, and so if I'm also really bad at remembering to bring my glasses everywhere. And so if the front of the classroom is all filled, I end up, I've always struggled with being in the middle or the back of the class. Also, it provides an opportunity for individuals to receive training that may or may not be in the budgetary considerations of a larger organization, right? So maybe there is a frontline employee who has not been earmarked to go to an annual conference, but they could benefit from the training. A VILT environment allows them to be away from their post for a set period of time and still retain the training that they otherwise would not. So I love that. And then finally, obviously, when you're looking at VILT or e-learning or individual learning, there is the true aspect of social learning on VILT. So that's one thing. For example, in the organization that we had the case study about, they were a social organization, and so they wanted to retain that as well. All right, so now we have challenges of VILT because despite being in sales, I do recognize that not everything is rosy all of the time. So some of the challenges that we face, I clicked a button, I'm sorry. There we go. Some of the challenges of the VILT is that it does rely on user adoption and comfort with a virtual environment, right? So there was a nice little discussion in our chat there that I'm far from qualified to get involved in as to whether we'll return to normal or not, but you have to have, yes, challenge user errors. Thank you, Krista. It relies on user adoption, and basically, is somebody comfortable with a computer? Can they run a basic PowerPoint slide on Zoom to a number of people, right? So there's always opportunities for people to accidentally click the wrong button or have a learning on the job environment. And for some people, I'm totally fine going out and talking and maybe clicking on the wrong slide. But for other people, it legitimately might derail the rest of the presentation or the rest of their learning experience. And so that is something that you have to consider. Additionally, delivery tools to the facilitator and the learner are new. So similar thing. The facilitator who may have been giving the same presentation for 20 years and is an absolute titan on this topic, unfortunately may be uncomfortable speaking to the void and not receiving that immediate audience feedback, right? So maybe the facilitator is feeding off of that. So that's something to consider. And such as TTA did for the case study we talked about earlier, putting in a T3. Obviously, it requires a financial investment. And we do have a slide later on potentially setting up some of the baseline on how to help justify the expense. But if we've already created a training, right, you spent X dollars last year creating this ILT training, this ILT program that you think will just be, that you have sold as being the solution to everything, and then suddenly, the world changes and we need to have some VILT, you have to convince people that the VILT conversion is worth the investment. And that could be a difficult sell because maybe you don't have feedback metrics already, or you don't have any ROI data or anything like that. Also, and this is sort of the inverse of the opportunity, right, of new ways of working. It is very possible that some organizations just are not there, or some teams may need some particular training to try to get across the line of making the new way of working feasible for different kinds of work. So that is a portion that you do have to consider. It's both I think, an opportunity, but again, I'm in sales, so I'm going to recognize that it is a challenge as well. And then finally, and this is a hard one, but the manager approval of the virtual learning vision. And again, that's all part of selling it, of demonstrating that perhaps every future lack of moving the needle potentially in an employee's behavior is not the fault of the e-learning, but just a natural part of the learning process. And so basically trying to, in a year when you're re-justifying the VILT spend, that it is not the fault of the e-learning, that perhaps this is just a hard topic to learn. I saw an absolutely wonderful comment earlier about a specific industry not wanting to be trained over e-learning. And we are currently working with a client in the healthcare industry that they have to be very careful about how they are giving training to people in the healthcare profession, especially virtually. but it's better that they get the training than they don't. And so it's sort of whichever one do you want. All right. Now, what are the benefits of e-learning? And I believe we have another poll on this. What are your feelings towards e-learning? I gave you guys a few more options on this one, so hopefully we feel good about that. And Kathleen, that is a wonderful point. We do have, she says, keeping your learner attention, whether in the office or in their home office, is a great point. And it's one of the Sisyphean tasks that we all face every day in e-learning. We do have a few ideas on that a little bit later. Alex, the definition of e-learning that we gave earlier is our operationalized definition is a one-on-one experience where a learner brings in training via electronic delivery. The poll should be popping up for people, and we'll give them another maybe 15 seconds. And to sort of wrap around also the definition, e-learning, another way to think about it is a learner with technology, not with one-to-one human interaction. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up the poll as much as we can. I'm sorry for anybody who may not have been able to access it. And I think the results should be popping up here soon. All right, well, as somebody who sells e-learning, I'm really happy to see that 46% of people deeply approve of e-learning. How wonderful. We have 40% of people somewhat approve, 12% are no strong feelings, 2% are somewhat disapprove, and 1% do not approve of e-learning. So let's see if we can talk to the 2 people who do not approve of e-learning. So some of the benefits of e-learning is that it is self-paced and asynchronous, and so individuals who may maybe, for example, a group of tellers at a bank need to all have a similar training, and they can't all be off the front line at one time to attend a group session. You can individually have people learn at convenient times, perhaps during slow periods or alternated throughout the week. It is very, very easily customizable and updated. We do a lot of compliance training, and compliance measures change year to year, and it's very easy to go into a specific slide or a specific knowledge check or quiz or anything like that and update that specific information should anything change. As far as being engaging, you can go anywhere from L1 or learning level 1 to learning level 4 and provide just very passive learning, or you can have branching learning that is very engaging. Over time, it is getting more and more popular, and you can see that that sort of distribution that we had in the poll is reflecting 46% is actually almost exactly what a couple of the ATD studies have shown in the last little bit as to people's opinions of e-learning. I already mentioned time away from work duties, and the one thing I love is if you have a competent LMS, you're able to very, very easily track what's going on and compare results. So if you're, for example, seeing that people are completing the training, they have a certain completion rate and it's not working, you can go back and you can change it, or you can very easily justify additional spend on the training because you have those results. And then also, and I found this amazing, that the available hour per talent development staff member is astronomical. And if you can move e-learning to be a portion of it, whether it's blended or straight e-learning, it absolutely changes the amount of availability of TD staff member. Basically, if they're freed up to deliver onboarding, right, maybe they can deliver another higher risk or higher issue training as well, or develop more e-learning potentially. All right, and as you can probably guess, we're going to look at some of the challenges of e-learning as well. Like everything, it relies on user adoption, and we kind of already hit on this with the VILT, but e-learning is even more because, as we heard earlier, keeping people's attention at their desk or their home office, or I'm in a laptop, I'm in my my home office and there's a television there and maybe I might get distracted. It's very important that we create the sort of learning environment that is engaging and pulling forward. I would argue Jonathan Rock that who says don't create an e-learning if an email would suffice. I would say don't have a meeting if an email would suffice as well. So always think about the learner and whether it's effective or not. Again, you have to get buy-in, and we do have a slide a little bit later on about how to prepare yourself for that argument. A lot of learners prefer the social aspects of ILT or VILT, and e-learning by definition is solitary, and that can be difficult for some people. And so you have to think about that when you're developing. Some things like audio can kind of help with that to make them feel a little more part of it, but really what it comes down to is good writing. Obviously technical support, and that includes both at the passive learning environment, right? But also to the physical infrastructure. If you have security procedures that do not allow, or security policies, excuse me, that do not allow you to access training on a personal device, then that's a pretty major issue in our current environment. So you have to figure that out. Also requires hardware, right? You have to have something to go off of. And here's the biggest one, and I almost had this slide have only one response, is that it is easy to do poorly. It is very, very easy to have e-learning that is non-engaging, that doesn't move the needle, that doesn't hit learning objective, and it's very easy to say, look, I made a thing, we can do this. It's very easy to just check the box, and that's sort of the difference of how much do you want to invest in specifically the e-learning environment, or how much do you want to invest in engaging and informative training. So some of the key takeaways that we're looking at here, and I have gone through many many versions of this slide because I wanted to just reiterate everything, but here we go quickly. Prevents opportunities to review learning objectives, may require buy-in from people unfamiliar with the technology, and it requires people to learn new programs. Well, all of those are good and bad things. E-learning, it does future-proof your training because you can turn the switch and then provide training to critical training to relevant people, basically at the drop of a hat, assuming all the technology issues are in place already. This is the biggest one, and oh, I love this one. It offers trackable metrics. And so you can say, hey, Ted, you need to go back and finish your Zoom training and figure out how to advance the slides in PowerPoint while you're live. And then finally, it does lose that social aspect, which is a little bit difficult to do, to replicate in e-learning. All right. We are getting close to the questions time, and we have a solid 49 questions, so I want to make sure we get to it. So I'm going to fly through a couple of these. The best practices for converting training is that we do want to carefully assess the learner needs. We talked about this with the conversion earlier, where does the activity suit the learner's objectives and needs, or are we just completely doing it because we think we need an activity? You want to make sure that all the materials are available, both have been created as well as are available to the individuals that need to use those materials. And I cannot undersell this enough, but get buy-in from stakeholders early in the process. You do not want to have a new stakeholder come in the day before delivery and try to change things as much as possible at the last second. Always test run things in the specific platform that you're planning to use. If you're going to use WebEx, don't test it in Zoom. And then finally, you want to set expectations and prepare learners. So if, for example, you expect people to speak up, you want to make sure that in a email before the training goes out, you prep people for the fact that some people are going to speak up in the training, or it's a very interactive training, or you need to have a pen in your hand, or whatever the case may be. Now let's quickly move to some things don't, right? Become too dedicated to specific aspects of your current training. It is very easy to say, I will die on this hill, we have to have this activity, but if it doesn't work in a virtual environment or an e-learning environment, then you need to make sure that you can adapt it for that specific delivery method. You don't want to use every new feature in your delivery platform. You don't want to just say, hey, let's do this, we can make this happen in a day. You want to carefully consider all the things before you start the program. And finally, you don't want to translate your training one-to-one. Not everything is going to carry over. A couple things to consider really, really quickly. Is you want to generate a T3, which John, the thin rock, again, helpful, train the trainer, especially if the facilitators are unfamiliar with VILT in both theory as well as in practice with particular platforms. I think it was Kathleen that mentioned earlier, make sure that you encourage breaks, right? So people don't want to sit for 4 hours and look at a computer. So you want to encourage breaks in a virtual environment as much as you would in a, a face-to-face environment. And we would recommend using a producer for technical support. The e-learning, we would recommend determining what platform is best for your learning needs. So some things, very passive learning. I am personally, I prefer Rise, Articulate Rise, because it's a great way to quickly develop engagement learning. Whereas something that's more built out, I think that Articulate Storyline is a wonderful option as well. And also you want to confirm how your users will access the content. And you want to make sure, again, what kind of technology will be used to deliver those as well. Some super fast examples that we have recently developed both of these for is, again, the Top 5 Consulting Agency that we mentioned earlier. And that was great because it was a face-to-face culture. We had a healthcare organization that needed to transfer critical bedside skills that we developed for. And that was in virtual because they were actually a virtual company that provided these solutions and this training. And they have places all over the country, and it was just not feasible for population health nurses to be off of the floor for that long. And then finally, a tech organization that had blended support, both VILT and e-learning, to help upskill their sales staff or onboard their sales staff. So there was a branching as to what sort of, whether they were brand new, onboard, or experience. We had different paths for them to follow. And finally, speaking of blended learning, what is e-learning ideal for? We recently worked with a national property developer who has locations all across the country, and they changed the way that they do their payments. And because it would be difficult for this particular demographic to actively change the way that they do things without help, we developed a really nice RISE course for them. Not-for-profit who was dedicated to making summer camps accessible. So they would send out the training prior to joining. And so people were ready and primed to go once they hit the ground. A multinational organization that was facing an upcoming retirement cliff. We created a situation where we both collected all of the institutional knowledge and then converted that into an onboarding storyline suite of modules. And then finally, a utilities company that had a very dedicated, it was, I think 12 or so slides, PowerPoint slides that were specifically compliance training focused. And we were able to very quickly and cost consciously convert those to Articulate Rise as well. So that was good because they operated in a couple different states and it didn't really justify everybody coming together at one time, but it did allow them to go through. Is that Marlene here?
Yes. Hello.
Hi. Real quick, I'm just going to show this and we'll go over it a little bit more because you will get the slide deck. But it's a checklist that I created to sort of go through your questions to be able to justify the spend. And while call TTA to find out more is at the start as Marlene comes in, I think it's great to contact TTA early and often to help get as much of the information as you have. So with that, any questions?
Okay, I'm going through the questions right now. Igor has a question. He asked for VILT, what are some of the best ways to assess or verify that learning has occurred?
So always pre-course surveys and post-course surveys are some things that I advocate for, but Cynthia, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, can they do what you're wanting them to do? And it really depends on what the learning is focused on. So what is the outcome? And the outcome will define what your assessments are.
Okay, that's great.
Marlene, real quick, I just want to say T3 is an acronym for TTT, or Train the Trainer. So it's a program where you provide a mini module or mini course to help the trainer deliver the material appropriately as designed.
Thanks. No, good call out. Greg Alongi has a question. How do you build, ooh, my screen keeps jumping. I'm sorry, I lost it now. Someone by the name of P. Locke would like to know, is it worth returning to the design plan before changing platforms and formats so quickly?
I think, yes, it is good to look at the design and make sure. I think that's one of the key things that we can do, is this provides a good inflection point to look at it and say, what are the learning objectives that would be both timely, right? So if it's the Band-Aid solution, what do our people need to learn in the next month? Maybe it's how to connect to the remote server, or whatever the case would be, right? Or is it something that we're permanently going to move to VILT or e-learning? So it's a great opportunity to go back to the design phase and carefully look over how to optimize the specific learning objectives for the specific delivery method.
And also some things may be pointless too. So if you have a teach on something to do in person, that's no longer relevant probably. And you may need to pivot and have, you know, how do you do this remotely? Like we did the case study, like how do you handle feedback remotely? What's different about that?
Oh, that's great. Jenny Smith would like to know, when you took the original ILT design and redesigned it for VILT, did you end up at 2 hours per VILT session because you chunked it into more than one VILT session, or did you strip out any extra fluff from the original design?
We stripped.
And was that guided by the reality that you needed to make it 2 hours, or by optimization for the platform, or both?
It was more about we needed to make it 2 hours. They part of this also, like we talked about setting up best practices for your learners, they incorporated things like having a teach to their learners of how to use WebEx. So they were actually doing more content, and they wanted shorter versions for the VILT to make sure their learners were still engaged and taking on all that information.
Excellent.
Okay. What are your thoughts on webcams for students?
So one of the points that we had on earlier that I took off, and I clearly needed to take off more because I had to run through the last 2 slides, you know, the whole sales slide of it, argue the meat and potatoes of the presentation. But we actually said, it depends on the size of the class, right? We have a grand total of 419 people on right now. And if we had 419 webcams, that would be wildly distracting for me. But if you have, you know, that does increase the social aspect of it. So if you have 10 to 15 people, then you can do that. The other thing that's great is if you notice your internet is starting to lag, it gives you an option to turn off, for example.
That's true.
But if you are a social organization, it is great to have that face-to-face with video. Obviously, it's not possible with webinars, but that's why you want like a Zoom meeting or WebEx that can bring that to the plate.
Oh, that's a good point. Are there any topics that shouldn't be or may be more challenging to convert to VILT? And that's a question from Jared.
That's a great question. My argument would be to look at it and talk to TTA and see if it would be a viable candidate. But Cynthia, do you have anything sort of off the cuff?
Off the cuff, I think ultimately anything is possible. However, it may not be reasonable. So like with all the resources in the world, you can do pretty much anything and have the best and most engaging and amazing thing possible, but is that the reality of your situation? So look at the content, look at what you're trying to teach, and look at your resources, and can you do it in the amount of time that you need it by? I think those are really the questions you have to answer first.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a great point from Kim Park saying items requiring certification or operator qualifications may not be able to be done remotely. And I think that's a great point. And that's one thing that TTA would be able to help you through, saying we would be able to do this for you, or this is really best handled in person, or we know another organization that would be wonderful to work with. So definitely reach out to TTA earlier rather than later to help figure out the feasibility of all that.
Great. Jonathan has a great question. How do you keep your participants actively engaged, and how do you know if they're paying attention?
So I'm going to say one thing real quick, and then I'll pass it over to you, Cynthia. When we said, another point I had about not using all of the tools available to you, right? A lot of different platforms provide metrics that you can watch in real time. For example, what is this person looking at? Are they looking at YouTube? Have they been inactive for a long time, or whatever the case is? And my argument for everything is that it goes back to good writing and trying to make sure that the content that you're trying to share is valuable to your learner is usable by the learner, and then is also works on the learning objectives. I would particularly argue against watching those metrics in a VILT session because their distractions will become your distractions. It's good to look at afterward maybe, but live, try to decrease the number of distractions possible. Cynthia?
Yeah, and I would say with engagement, I mean, that's not just a problem with virtual instructor-led training or just e-learning. You can have a live training and someone's just totally zoned out or on their phone, you know what I mean? So it's not a new problem. You just handle it a little bit differently. And I think for especially this audience, ultimately, we're teaching to adults. You know, this is their opportunity to learn skills and to do better for their job and to progress and get better. So if they don't want that, I mean, that's kind of on them. There are things you can do. You definitely don't want to have a 4-hour training with no questions or no interaction. Like that would be terrible.
Or a break, right?
Exactly. So, I mean, there are things you can do, but learner engagement is ultimately up to the learners. And one other thing is make the point of why it's important to them up front. So what's in it for you? So what? Answer those questions to get them on board with you quickly is my advice.
So we have two great things that I want to point out in the chat. Heather says you have to really answer why people need to know that. And that is golden, right? That's the litmus test for all training. And then Denise has a great thing talking about using relevant language. And again, it goes back to good writing, right? Another point that we had that we took off the original presentation was when you are asking people questions, don't just instantly speak over them if nobody answers. And that's part of setting expectations as well. So if you recognize that there will be a point for people to ask questions, try to make the language work that makes people able to answer, right? If I suddenly started asking everybody about why the US went off the gold standard, everybody's gonna not be able to jump in and answer that question. So make it a very logical continuation. And
reframe. Don't just start asking 7 other questions to fill up the space and oh god, they have to answer something. Like just give it time. It's okay. And also one other cool trick, as you go through the presentation, you're going to notice that some of your learners are more active and more, you know, readily responsive. So it is okay to call on people eventually, but don't call on people the first question because you have no idea who those extroverts are. And some people do not want to be called on. So, you know, it's just part of facilitating.
All right, Nancy Cheswick has a great question and actually something I've never even thought of, but it's so real. How and what are you giving to participants to better understand how to interact with the platform in order to actively participate in the class? When are you providing that instruction? Before class, at the beginning of class, etc., and how and where to ask questions?
So part of that is preparing the learner for success. I like the idea of, and it kind of depends, right? So if people are ad hoc signing up for the training, maybe it's an optional thing. It'd be treated differently than a compliance thing, for example. But I do like the idea of providing relevant material that won't confuse people or cause them to search out incorrect answers. Like a week ahead, maybe a little bit earlier, maybe you have some things, maybe you want to pan out the slides and so people can take notes on them or whatever the case may be. I'm a fan of setting people up for success and not trying to surprise them with your genius during a presentation or during a training. So, Cynthia?
Yeah, in our case study, we actually, since it was part of a bigger event, they had like a 30 or an hour-long module just on getting to know the platform because their learners had not used it at all. So that was really helpful. And we actually also had a facilitator guide. And what we did is we turned it into a fillable PDF. That way they could take notes along as they went if they wanted to. And part of that is just the timing. We could not get it printed and mailed out in time. But also it's, you know, it works for the modality. So it just depends on your learners, the type of training, what they need, and what you have available.
No, that's great. I think we have time for just one more. What are best practices for VILT facilitator to participant ratios? Do you always recommend a producer or only when you reach a certain number of participants? And that's a question from Lisa Young. Thanks for the question.
Lisa, I'm going to be infuriating and say it depends and then pass to my my master of ceremonies, Cynthia.
Yeah, it depends. So it really does depend on the type of training though. It depends on how engaging you want it to be, what the topics are. Ideally, I think 25 and less is kind of a ballpark good thing you can work with. Whether or not you need a producer, that depends on the facilitator. Have they done this type of thing before? Are they accustomed to the platform? Are they comfortable with it? Is there someone in the company that wants to be involved? Is it a tool that's a little awkward? That, you know, it really just depends on your needs.
I think, again, looping back around to that integral pivot point of what is it we're trying to teach people, why should they need to know this, and how can we best do that? It's a lot easier in some environments to have 419 people, hypothetically speaking, and then sometimes, you know, you may need a coaching one-on-one VILT session as well. So it depends.
Very
But
good.
TTA can answer all your questions should you need to ask.
Yeah. No, so we're at the top of the hour. I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for joining us. You know, you have a lot of choices out there. There's a lot of webinars available, and we really, really appreciate you guys joining us. And thanks to Ted and Cynthia for sharing some insights about some great projects. And we hope you guys have a safe and healthy week. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you everyone so much for your time.
Thank you.